As you all rush towards the sound of the commotion, you arrive just in time to see a cart go slamming into the front of an abandoned building. People scatter as the cart explodes in a ball of fire. Nearby you see a villager cackling to themselves as the town's guard move in to arrest the poor fellow. That should get those monsters out of their hiding spots. Hello, and welcome to Tuna's Tales. This time on Pondering Monsters, we'll be covering the Mothfolk from the Grim Hollow Monster Grimoire. Now, you may be looking at this creature and thinking, hey, that's a Mothman, and you'd be right. From the legends about showing up near disasters to making people that see it go crazy, this fey creature can do it all. Also, this is hopefully going to be the start of a segment around cryptid encounters in D&D. If you've got suggestions for cryptids that you want to see an encounter for, then let me know. If I can find stats for it, then I'll use those, but if not, then I guess I'll just have to homebrew some. That being said, if you're curious what disastrous portents your party will have to deal with when Mothman comes to town, then stick around as we get into it. We join our heroes as they rest at a tavern for the evening. The air is thick with merriment and songs about heroes of old. It all comes to a sudden halt, though, when the sound of people shouting about a fire comes in off the street. Our heroes rush to see what the commotion is, and sure enough, there's a large fire enveloping a nearby house. It looks ready to jump to the building next to it, but our heroes leap into action before it can happen. With the fire extinguished, our heroes look around to see if they can find anyone suspicious. It doesn't take them long to spot a couple of people being led away by the town's guard while babbling to themselves. Our heroes ask the guards what's going on and learn that these were the culprits that set the fire. After listening to their mad ravings, our heroes pick up that these folk think there were monsters in that building. The guards, however, say that it's just an abandoned bit of property. Something isn't adding up for our heroes, and they begin an investigation of their own. Their search takes them all over the town and has them looking into many different people. As they're investigating, several more disasters occur, and at the center of each one is someone who seems to have lost their mind. Things come to a head when the party tracks down the wealthy landowner that not only had the resources to cause these disasters, but also the means to profit off of them. As they bring him in, he fervently denies these claims, all while the heroes are unaware of the real culprit watching them from the rooftops.
Ooh, a mystery.
That's right. It looks like we've got a mystery on our hands.
Jinkies, do we have time for some questions?
Totally. What you got for me?
Okay, Tuna, what's really going on here?
I'm glad you asked, Red. If you're familiar with Scooby-Doo, then you may have caught on to the general idea behind this encounter. However, we're in a fantasy world with actual monsters, so there's no mask to remove on this one.
So are there actually monsters causing these disasters?
In a roundabout way, yes. The entry for Mothfolk says that they are often found around disasters, relishing the mayhem. The first disaster wasn't directly caused by a Mothfolk, but it did show up to see it happen. Because of that, someone saw the Mothfolk and triggered the Mothfolk's curse ability.
Uh-oh, what does that do?
Well, if you fail a save, then you become cursed and gain the flaw, "Get me away from these monsters hiding everywhere." When I read that, I immediately thought to myself, hey, this means that Mothfolk can cause Mothfolk.
Wait, how?
Mothfolk are drawn to disasters, right? Well, if someone is cursed to think that monsters are hiding everywhere, then they might also think that they have to do something about it. If what they do causes a disaster, then more Mothfolk might show up. This causes more people to see them, get cursed, and cause more disasters. Rinse and repeat until a populace just kind of collapses in on itself.
Is that the end goal of this encounter, then? To stop a town from collapsing?
Sort of. I'd say the end goal is more like trying to get your party to uncover the Mothfolk that are at the center of all this. If they can sift through all the red herrings and false leads, then they can save the town.
False herrings and red leads?
Close. Red herrings and false leads. Basically, this whole mystery is one big false lead. We want to run the party around town and have them suspect someone, only to later learn that they were framed by the Mothfolk. All the signs point to this individual, and they can even have reason to do what the party is accusing them of.
Okay, but why is this person being framed?
For that, you can come up with any number of reasons. Things like a cursed family line, disrespect to a fey noble who has Mothfolk working for them. Or, given that they're typically chaotic evil fey creatures, it might be fun to say they're doing it just because they found the perfect scapegoat.
What if the party doesn't find out about the Mothfolk?
In that case, you have a couple options. You could say that the town is now doomed. Mothfolk will run rampant as more disasters begin happening unless your party catches and confronts them. Or you could say that with the NPC properly framed and locked up, the Mothfolk are just done with their work and they leave to cause havoc in another town. Maybe the party can even encounter them again later. Of course, any middle ground you can come up with would also work as long as it makes sense.
I can work with that. Now, you mentioned disasters. Just how disastrous we talking?
Really, anything that would make people scared in a fantasy-style town works, but it needs to be able to be carried out by almost anyone. Fires, runaway cargo, collapsing buildings, falling pianos, etc.
And should these always be happening?
I don't think so. They should happen as a means to further the mystery. If your party thinks they've hit a dead end, then you can have a disaster happen somewhere nearby to drop them another clue. You can also use old disaster locations as a spot for your party to investigate. Of course, if you're taking a bit of a Scooby-Doo approach here, then try to find some way to make every disaster tie in with abandoned or high-cost properties in town. Ideally, all owned by the same person. That alone can be its own clue.
And what if my party tries to stop a disaster from happening?
Simple. Don't let them. They can't try if it's not an option. Any new disasters can be narrated as being a street or two over or elsewhere in the city. By the time they arrive, either the disaster has happened, is being taken care of, or has already hit a point that it can only be contained.
That seems a little lackluster from the player's side.
You're not wrong, but you can also spin that into a clue. Why are these always happening somewhere that the party isn't able to help? How is someone even managing to do that? Since the Mothfolk curse is what makes people cause disasters, the Mothfolk can kind of pick where the next one occurs.
Well, alright. I think that's all for me, Tuna.
Perfect! What do you say we look at tying this all together?
Yeah!
Starting this is easy. Whenever your party is in a town, you can kick things off with a disaster happening nearby. This can be anything, but I think a simple fire works nicely. As your party arrives on the scene, they can see the aftermath of the disaster, with the city guard leading someone away. If your party doesn't take the bait right then and there, you can have them overhear the person being arrested pleading with the guards that they're innocent and that it was the monsters in that building. As you all arrive in front of the burning building, you see some of the guards have managed to contain it while a couple others are leading a man away from the fire in shackles while he tries to plead with them. Please, it wasn't me. I was just trying to stop the monsters that are hiding in there. You have to believe me. Of course, if your party still doesn't take the bait, then just do a different disaster at a later time. The more it keeps happening, the more likely you'll be to have someone ask why. If they start to question or investigate, then you're in business. Every so often, have another disaster happen that they can get clues from, and before you know it, they'll have found the culprit. Speaking of clues, though, you should spend most of your prep time on creating them. I've talked about running mysteries in some of my other videos, but if you're looking for the approach I take, then you can find a link in the description to the Alexandrians video on the topic. Totally worth a watch. The clues that you use should point the party towards a specific conclusion. In this case, it should be the person being framed by the Mothfolk. I think the best way to do this is to treat it like the framed NPC is actually responsible. Doing this should prevent the party from getting hung up on anything or getting stuck later. The biggest drawback to this approach, though, is how to actually reveal that this NPC was framed. If you can convince the party to investigate the NPC's house, then they could find info about a centuries-old family fae curse, or they could find some fae just looting the place that they could then question. Maybe even the Mothfolk themselves are hanging around. Otherwise, a classic approach to this would be that while the NPC is in custody, another disaster happens. Typically, this means that the NPC can't be responsible since they were being watched. For this disaster, you can have the party arrive before it's too late, or even be around to stop it before it starts. As they're trying to do so, that's when they see the Mothfolk. You all round the corner and see someone starting to cut the support beams of the tavern porch. As you rush forward to try and stop them from causing another disaster, you manage to catch, just out of the corner of your eye, several large humanoid-shaped moths floating silently in a nearby alleyway. If you reveal the Mothfolk here, then you can start up a combat with the party. If they beat the Mothfolk, then the town is saved. Of course, if you don't want to do combat but still reveal the Mothfolk, then you can always have the party see the Mothfolk flying away into the distance as the party works on handling the disaster. On the topic of combat, though, these creatures are CR4. Using that as a starting point, like we do here, means that 2 of them will give you a medium combat for a 5th level party of 5. Due to action economy scaling, though, and taking into account any magic items or homebrew your party may have access to, you can probably run 3 of them and have everything come out fine. Otherwise, their stat block is pretty simple. They have Fey traits that give them resistances and advantages on certain checks, a 2-attack multi-attack, and a save-based curse that they can use to cause fear. The biggest thing that I'd watch out for, though, is the flyby trait that they have, as if you've seen my Hook Horror video, that can really put pressure on players. After combat wraps up, then the party can take the remains of the Mothfolk to clear the name of the framed NPC. If they want to. Who knows, maybe they actually deserve to be locked up. As the last of the Mothfolk dives out of the sky towards you, setting sun behind them in an attempt to obscure your vision, you ready your blade. As soon as they're in range, you raise the point of your sword, impaling them as they go crashing into you. Pushing the now lifeless form off of you, your party starts to debate about collecting the evidence needed to clear the name of the person that was falsely accused. At the end of it all, though, I think it's important to reveal the Mothfolk as the culprits here, but how you decide to do that is really up to you. If your world has things like libraries, then research is always an option. Or a simple NPC that knows what these creatures are can work too. Or if you seed this adventure with rumors of these creatures as a local pest in this town, then you can turn that reveal into a confirmation. But there's still one more important question here. How do you run this for higher level parties? Setting this up for higher levels of play starts off pretty easy. For 10th and 15th level parties, you can just add more. If we accept that Mothfolk beget Mothfolk, then it makes sense. 3 or 4 of these creatures make for a medium encounter, while 5 or 6 make for a hard encounter at 10th level. For 15th level, you'll need 7 for a medium encounter and 8 for hard. Action economy starts to get a little unbalanced there, so you may be better off adjusting their stats and leaning hard into the flyby tactics on this one. If you are running this for higher levels though, then I'd recommend giving them more health at the very least. They have 60 on average, but could probably stand to have an additional 15 to 30 on top of that. Oh, and consider bumping up the save DC on their curse. It's wisdom based and is pretty low for higher levels. I'd probably go as high as a DC 16 at most. Now go forth and bring the Mothman unto your party. Ideally, this can be used as a nice introduction to a town or to people in the town. Your party gets to go around and investigate things, meet new people, and when all is said and done, they might even be able to say that they caught the Mothman. If you like this encounter and want to see more like it, then liking and subscribing can help with that. Also, if you have questions, suggestions for monsters, especially cryptids, or just want to tell me how one of these encounters went at your table, then pop on by the comments down below. With that, thanks for letting me talk at you all, and until next time, keep pondering.